Hello, Riga. Hello, Labia. Actually, I come here kind of often. My wife is from Šiauliai, which is in Lithuania, but when we visit family, we take the airport, Riga airport, and we come here all the time. Um, Today, we're going to talk about how modern Ruby powers the reintegration of high-speed microservices into Rails. In other words, I'm going to talk to you about why a lot of companies decided 10, 15 years ago that Ruby was not enough and we need to build microservices, and why I think that if at that moment that was maybe not a super great idea, right now I don't think there are good reasons to do that anymore. But yeah, first, let me introduce myself. I think about me, you need to keep two ideas. One, I'm from Barcelona. I lived abroad for more than 10 years, but I eventually came back. I love the city. One of the reasons why I love the city is that because we have this great meetup event. If you're ever around and Barcelona.rb is happening, please join us. The other one is that I've been doing Ruby for more than 15 years. This is a picture of Mats in Baruco, the Ruby conference we used to have there in Barcelona. And I started my career in a company called Playful Bet, which I became the CTO. CTO in that context meant the only engineer in the company, so I was, and that was a pretty intense experience because this company, which unfortunately didn't make a lot of money, was really popular. Like sometimes I meet people that are in their early 30s and they remember, yeah, I used to play that thing. So scaling something that was popular at the national level alone was kind of crazy. And then at a certain point I decided, well, I need to learn how to scale stuff, so I'm going to join big tech. I worked for some big tech company for the last 11 years, but still, even if I saw there that you could make a Rails application that worked for the whole planet, then I was thinking, hey, this works, Rails is great. But then I entered into Twitter, and I found stuff like this. And that was really annoying, because it's like the reality of my life and what people are saying in Twitter is completely opposite. So then actually, that's how I decided to become a speaker. As you see, I put a lot of anime slides. And I eventually wrote a book. Please. Yeah. Please buy it. It's in print this month, so yeah. And this is actually something I made up yesterday. I'm becoming a consultant. This is called Ruby on Flames. Is the name I made up for my consultancy company. So if you have problems with the scaling, please ping me. Said this. The story I'm going to talk about is not about the scalability so much, but about Rails. And in particular, also about microservices and the relationship with scaling a company, scaling a business, scaling an application. But for this, we are going to need to do some time traveling. As I told you, I like putting anime slides. So we're going to go back to the mid-2000s. And I think this is going to be a pretty welcome pretty welcome trip. Because, it's really hard times. It's hard times, especially for us software engineers. I mean, in the last year, I've lost my job so many times, in a way, according to social media. We are going extinct. This is probably the last tech conference you are ever going to attend, because tomorrow something is going to make us disappear. We're going to be replaced by some evil machines. But say this, if you've been in the profession for a while, this kind of sounds familiar. When I studied computer science, and I remember going to a class was called Software Engineering 1 and 2. I failed them multiple times. And I remember the teacher clearly saying, yes, if you follow this, you learn what we are going to teach you here, you won't need to program. I actually don't understand why they are teaching you to program in Java. It's useless. That subject was mainly about learning UML. Someone remembers UML, or is it still? So yeah. Well, so I haven't done UML since I left college. I've programmed quite a lot, even in Java. But who knows? Maybe this time is the right one and we are going extinct, but who knows? Anyway, it's hard times. There were better times where, being a software engineer was super cool and amazing. And those were the times where Rails was really, really new. Rails in the end is only 20 years old. it was the times where Rails wasn't the peak of inflated expectations. If you know what I mean. I mean, I have really good memories of that time. Not only because of, well, I was also younger, which was nicer, but it also because Rails power a revolution both in tech, but I would say even socially. Rails and Ruby give a lot of power to an individual developer. For example, what I explained before. Yes, there is this company that I work for, and it's like half of Spanish teenagers are playing with the game. How many people are you? No, it's only me. That would have sounded crazy 30, 40 years ago. And the idea, the concept of very small teams being empowered to do crazy stuff, that was thanks to Ruby and thanks to Rails. It's so nice that actually, in my head, I like to imagine Ruby as this kind of idyllic old-time village, where everything makes sense and is comfortable. I imagine specifically like something in the US Northwest, no? Yeah. This would be me. There is no sound, by the way. There should be sound. Thank you. So the town in my head is called Railstown, Rubyland. And in Railstown, Rubyland, you have the nice cafe, typical, where you have fantastic cherry pie and delicious coffee. And you find really familiar characters that make your life easier. You have NBC, that makes everything connect and find stuff. And then forget about learning how to build crazy queries. You have Active Record to help you. It was great. And thanks to all this magic, this was a huge, economic growth. If you're in a startup, you probably know the hockey stick and this crazy growth that was made thanks to the fact that very small teams were able to do incredible stuff. So these new orgs that were able to serve, to planetary audiences had a new kind of needs. Thankfully, they were able to scale the Rails monoliths, thanks to, horizontally scale. They were able to do so using stuff like caching, or in some cases, sharding. But still, eventually, they found problems. There was something wrong in our idyllic town of Railstown, Rubyland. What was it wrong? Okay, let me explain a bit. So one thing I like to say all the time is that we software engineers are basically data plumbers. So basically like Mario with a laptop. So we move data around. And at that time, and still now, there is a very popular pattern to move data around called ETL. And this is something that I'm going to use as an example of the issues that you had 15 years ago when building an ETL application or ETL piece of software with Ruby. Here you have a schema of how a typical ETL system works. And piece by piece, how does it work? Well, first you start by extracting data. You have an origin, source of data, and you fetch it. For example, you want to get all the information from your users from different data sources, different databases, relational databases, whatever, key value stores, merge it, and eventually put it into Elasticsearch. So in the first step, you fetch the data from all these data sources. In the second, you transform it. This may mean, merging data sets, changing data types, filtering, deduplicating it, trying to make it all following the same patterns. And finally, you're going to load all that data into the target system. In this case, the example I'm going to use, we wanted to push it into Elasticsearch. The thing is that this is a pretty common pattern that you see very commonly, but there are not many examples written in Ruby. But still, here, there was a reason why. There was the reasons why ETL systems in Ruby were problematic, if you want. And this is where we found the dark part of Railstown, Rubyland. There were very scary creatures waiting for us out there when trying to build this system. The first one, and people who are very veterans of Ruby will remember those times when there was a huge problem, is memory management. How many people here have seen, well, later. Later we'll talk about that. Say this, know that memory management is way better than it used to be a lot of years ago. I mean, I've been doing Ruby for 15 years. I remember that when I joined, I was reading comments about how it's working with Rails, and my experience didn't match because people were saying, yes, you need to restart your Rails application every 20 minutes. It was like, this never happened to me. Seems like 20 years ago, this was way more common. Said this. Yeah, this is not a huge problem anymore, but the reality is that you never get a second chance of making a first impression. If you go to Hacker News, where I discuss mainly IT stuff, you will find that the same that some opinions on PHP are based on the state of PHP 20 years ago. This also happens to Ruby. You know, someone checked Ruby 1.7, and that's all he knew about Ruby forever, unfortunately. Anyway, there was another monster that was way more scary than memory management. This monster is called the GVL. The GVL ensures that only one thread executes Ruby code at a time. But I thought that this presentation was a little bit too cold, just defining it. So I decided to ask ChatGPT to make a video to introduce the GVL. So I told him, create a video of a beginner developer new to Ruby meeting the GVL for the first time. Let's see. Okay, so introducing multi-threading, which was the final boss of Ruby performance problems. I mean, I'm kind of joking about this, and actually the GVL is not that bad, or it doesn't need to be a bad idea in general. There's been some debate about would it make sense to remove it? Is it even possible? If you want to learn a way more sane take on this than this presentation, please read Jane Bridger's blog. But said this, the GVL also doesn't technically stop the execution in all cases. It is actually released for certain operations. Like, so for example, if you write to this, you make system calls, sleep operations, and you can even call a certain instruction to unlock it. So there are ways around it. Except, going back to my idea that you only have one chance of making a first impression, it wasn't always like this. Until, I think, end of 2007, Ruby had what is called green threads. I made this funny image. The idea of a green thread was that basically you could make threads, but they were virtual threads. So things like sleep 5 would stop the execution of the whole process for 5 seconds. And like you didn't have a way to have having, well, let's say that this really made it much harder to make scalable applications in Ruby. I say that this maybe is the reason why Ruby is so targeted about oh, it's not performant, because other languages that right now have very similar performance issues never had that. Like Python has never had this green threads stuff. And yeah, again, maybe that's why this idea of Ruby being slow comes from. Still, at the time, and going back to my example of writing an ATL system, multi-thread system in Ruby, there was a solution that was very popular. And actually, I remember very well because in this conference, there was a lot of talks about this solution, which was using JRuby. JRuby offered us real threads. You could just have real threads, and it was not even blocked by. It was like you could run multiple threads of the same process, running code, not only making SQL queries or whatever. Another great thing about JRuby is that it offers us access to Java libraries. And particularly 15 years ago, when Ruby was a much more, maybe less popular language, there was not a lot of, there was some stuff that were missing, and Java had more libraries in this case. Finally, JRuby also happened to be just faster. This is a benchmark that I found from 2012, but you can see that. So what happened with all these problems? Okay, we were a bit worried about, well, what is going to happen with us? What should we do? But still, we decided to get into the darkness and try to build an ETL system in Ruby, in this case, in the JRuby implementation. Okay, so this application I've been talking about has been going around for now 15 years. But before moving on, I wanted to explain what is all this presentation based on. Who knows what were those characters? Nobody? Yes, Twin Peaks. Actually, the reason why I decided to make a presentation about Twin Peaks was because, well, recently David Lynch died, well, so I said, hey, let's watch it. I had never seen it. And in the last episode of the original, the first season, there is this character says this thing, I'll see you again in 25 years, which has a funny thing because between season 2 and season 3, exactly 25 years pass. So basically, season 2 ends with this, and they continue the TV show 25 years after. The same, after seeing this, it's like, wow, it would be nice to make up a presentation about, something that started in certain conditions and then how it evolved through, a long period of time. Also because in software engineering, you see a lot of how patterns change, or the most popular patterns change without a lot of times a very strong reason. Particularly with monoliths and microservices, we've seen this crazily. Late 2010s, sometimes you felt that having a monolith was an anti-pattern. And now, suddenly, it's not anymore. Still, I would say that I've learned some lessons in these 15 years working on the system. One is that when you are in a big company where there is a lot of different languages, and you have different teams working in all those different languages, I would say it's a fascinating experience. Because learning a language is not only about learning the syntax. It's about adopting a way of thinking about the world. I think I always say that I don't know what I would have in my career if I wouldn't have discovered Ruby, because Ruby made a click in a certain way in my brain that empowered me to enjoy programming. I wouldn't do the same probably in C. I can do C, but it doesn't make the same kind of click. And still, not all languages have the same distance to each other. Some transitions are easier than others. I actually asked ChatGPT to list different languages in distance with Ruby. I don't know. That's ChatGPT's take. I would say it's pretty accurate in my experience. I would say maybe Scala is a little bit more different than Java, but well, whatever. So switching languages can be complicated. And I will give you an example of something that happened when I was working in a big company. I have this slide now. So basically, we had this idea that we're going to build a lot of microservices in Java, and this was an order into an org that was very, very Ruby-centric. They were great engineers, but they didn't have a lot of experience in Java. What happened? Well, building applications was okay, was fine. You could see a team growing, learning slowly, but growing on Java, until we hit certain bugs that were framework level. In our specific case, we had a bug with the Redis client. And at that point, you found out, well, we really don't know. We need someone, we need an expert to guide this transition. That's actually my take. If you have a situation like that, like you want to introduce a team into a different language, you need someone to guide them, someone with deep expertise to bring them into the new place. But actually, this transition can be through all these problems, even in different implementations of the same language. Like, for example, JRuby. I say this because in the story I'm explaining, for certain reasons, we hired Java developers to write JRuby. Yes. So you may end up doing, and the following image is also coming from ChatGPT. I Actually, I asked this ChatGPT to write the word Ruby in the style of the Java logo. So that didn't work. I mean, what didn't work, both the image creation and writing Ruby Java style. Because it's highly strange. I mean, what I'm going to show you is inspired in real facts. And let's say that the first thing I did when I joined the team was setting up Robocop. So this is an example of what I call Java-style Ruby. Abstractions, interfaces. It was a bit strange to see that. Another issue, it will call it library divergence. And you will be thinking, well, it's still Ruby. How is going to be library divergences in between JRuby and, well, C Ruby? Well, first of all, there can be, because it's one of the cool things about JRuby is that you can use Java libraries. For example, we're talking about this is a searching system. You need a language detector. The Ruby language detector is going to behave in slightly different ways than most of Java language detectors. And this difference may not be acceptable for multiple reasons. But I will tell you something even weirder sometimes. It's what I call my sick story. You know what is SYCK? Yes. So SYCK is the original, I think, YAML parser of Ruby. I think it was deprecated more than 10 years ago, for sure. But again, in this monolith I was working in, it was very ancient, so it was using this. And we had immense amount, like billions of data serialized in database using this YAML parser. So we couldn't migrate easily. Problem is that, again, SYCK had been deprecated for more than 10 years, everybody was using Psych. And what I meant everybody was that in JRuby you only had Psych. JRuby never had this old YAML parser implementation. So what happened? Basically, when my JRuby application was trying to read from the database of this CRuby serialized data, it was spitting errors. There were a few combinations that they were just incorrect. Which we tried to ask if they could add support for JRuby, but honestly, it was for an effort that wouldn't make a lot of sense. So eventually, and by we, I mean I had to spend time trying to build a seek to psych mini transformer, trying to find all the use cases in which the seek was generating invalid YAML and make it acceptable for psych. It was a peculiar project. Moreover, again, you can, when you're working in different languages or even between different implementations of the same language, you may be needing that the two languages behave in very, very similar ways. And moving to a Ruby equivalent can be very hard. Again, the example I was saying before about the language detectors in Java and in Ruby. Finally, and it's something that is quite interesting to me, you may find that you have thread safety issues. I would say for us Ruby developers, thread safety is like an interesting topic. Particularly when you move from C Ruby to a Ruby implementation that doesn't have the GIL, doesn't have a lock, like JRuby. The problem is that which libraries were thread safe and which ones they were not, it was not immediately obvious. And eventually we had to discover it by ourselves, like trial and error. We also had to learn how to write thread safe Ruby. One common problem that we had different pieces moving around, and each one was running on its own thread. And sometimes it was hard for us to avoid thread safety issues. Moreover, anybody that has worked with a system that is thread and safe knows that it's incredibly hard to detect the errors because they are not deterministic. If you write a test for them, you will have 99% false negatives because it's something hard to catch. My final point would be that historically concurrency has not been a first-class citizen in Ruby. And I want to highlight the part of historically, because I think that's not the case anymore. Okay. Now we're getting to the end, so I would like to comment on this idea of why I believe that microservices are not so relevant anymore, particularly in the Ruby community. I think that going back to the monolith, even even the idea of let's destroy these services and let's put them back to the monolith makes sense. The reason is that, well, I believe that the original motives to building microservices are not that relevant. For example, one reason that was typically given is that it gives, it's obviously building microservices is very modular. There's not a harder limited module that having your own application, if you may. And there is team autonomy. Well, this is seems like an interesting topic, interesting reason, but I kind of disagree with it. Actually, if you want to know more about this topic, last year in Rails World was this great talk by Eileen called "The Myth of the Modular Monolith." And actually here, she's not talking about services, she's talking about writing a monolith with modules in it, or with hard modules around service layers. But I think that most of the arguments are still valid for microservices. Actually, they are even more valid for microservices. Still, I think that she has a very, very good quote about all this topic, that is that you can't engineer yourself out of a large org. You have this application that does 100 things, or a business that has 100 things, this is a complexity that it will exist forever. Like, if you divide it into 100 services, it will exist still, but you also have 100 deployed pipelines, 100 testing suites. The problem is not going to disappear, you're just moving it around. Said this, I do see value in projects like Packwork. I think that at least if you have a huge monolith, putting some, let's say, soft lines around helps you to structure better the application in your mind. At least for me, it worked. But again, her point stands. Like, you cannot, even if you divide this very huge complex application into 2 applications, yeah, you have 2 slightly less complex applications, but the complexity is still there. Another reason why people wanted to move out of Rails monoliths was tech choices. And yes, this meant that sometimes people didn't want to use Ruby anymore. And the idea was that, again, maybe Ruby was not fast enough, it was hard to scale. I would say that using cloud and Kubernetes help a lot with scalability. The fact that you can spin out way more hosts in a way faster, in a very fast way, makes us much easier to have horizontal scalability. This is actually a quote from a friend. I was discussing this, and I thought it was interesting. With Kubernetes in the cloud, we don't need to care that much about multi-threading. Well, maybe. And maybe you don't even need to go to the cloud. The reason why companies were moving to the cloud was that they felt that hiring their own team would be very expensive, like their own DBA team would be, or ops team, would be too expensive, too complicated. The reality is that the tooling has improved a lot in the last years. I don't know if you're following the HH, most probably you do, but he's putting a lot of comments on how they're moving out of AWS, and it seems that it's quite a success. So that's very interesting. Yeah, another positive change, I think it happened for doing data engineering projects in Ruby, is the rise of event sourcing. And by event sourcing, I mean things like Kafka. With event sourcing, it's very easy to replace the paradigm that I explained before of the ETL that extracts data from different sources to a paradigm based on a push. This reduces by a lot the load on DB. For example, in the system I was commenting before, when we were running reindex, they could have big problems to our databases that were actually serving data for our customers. With event sourcing, that's not a problem anymore. Yeah. It also allows a simple way to run batch processing, which is actually another problem. So if you are fetching data, sometimes you don't want to be pushing each individual record. With event sourcing is easier. And moreover, you will be thinking, hey, you are talking all the time about going back to the monolith. Why having Kafka consumers? Well, you can actually have the Kafka consumers integrated into the monolith, so they can use all the libraries, all the code, all the business logic that you have already built for your application. Following this pattern, I really recommend you a project called Maxwell from Zendesk. What Maxwell does is it reads from the bin log of your SQL databases and generates one Kafka event for each transaction. So that's like ready to consume and ready to update whatever data sources you have, or sorry, whatever data storage you have, based on changes, real changes, committed changes in database. Finally, and maybe that's actually one thing that I wanted to highlight when I said before that historically the Ruby community didn't care about multi-threading. I would say that right now, Ruby is faster and way more concurrency friendly than it used to be. Examples, well, the YJIT, actually now the upcoming CJIT in Ruby 4. Projects like Concurrent Ruby has been going for more than a decade, I think, right now. But it's different libraries that help to make Ruby more concurrent. And then even things that are really not still there, maybe they are not production ready, but they are incredibly promising, like Raptor, the actor model abstraction for Ruby. But when I say that people in the Ruby community cares more about performance and concurrency, I mean even in libraries that are maybe not directly related. One example is Kafka. Kafka is a pretty popular library for using Kafka in Ruby. And in the documentation, they have a full section about concurrency and multithreading, which is something that is really, really welcome. It shows how Ruby got to a maturity stage that maybe it wasn't 15, 20 years ago. So I'm getting to the end. I would like to leave with a few words. First is that I do believe that Ruby's limitations have been grossly exaggerated, particularly maybe not so much in the Ruby community anymore, but for people that doesn't do Ruby often. Sometimes when I'm discussing, again, in Hacker News or in Twitter, I feel like these people are discussing Ruby from the Stone Age, like Ruby 1.7 or something like this. The reality of Ruby is not that one anymore. The second is when you are discussing scalability and performance problems in the internet, you need to know that this is the most commonly discussed scaling issue. Like most of the problems that people are debating are purely hypothetical or based on the businesses that are very peculiar. Like we discussed so many times, like, oh, solve me system design problem in the interview, solve me Twitter. Okay, fascinating, but not the reality of 99.9% of businesses. But again, most importantly, the reality is that the Ruby community has been working on these problems for years. We've achieved a way faster, way more concurrent, way more scalable Ruby. So we go back to the most important question maybe about building software. You need to choose whatever tool is the best for the project. And this a lot of times means choosing the tool that is best for the team. And then finally, because as Matt says, Ruby is designed to make programmers happy. Thank you.